What if I told you that that $500 ultra-sensitive high-modulus graphite rod you saved up for is actually making you a worse fisherman? It sounds like heresy, I know. We've been taught to worship at the altar of sensitivity, but today we're talking about a hard truth. Your super stiff, sensitive rod might be the very reason you're ripping hooks straight out of the fish's mouth. By the end of this video, you'll understand why feeling everything isn't always a good thing, and I'll show you why a little more give in your rod can mean a lot more fish in the boat. Think I'm crazy? Let me ask you this. How many times have you set the hook on a solid bite, felt weight for a split second, and then it just goes slack? Tell me about it in the comments below. For years, maybe even decades, the fishing industry has been in an arms race for sensitivity and stiffness. Every new flagship rod promises to be lighter, stiffer, and more sensitive than the last. We've been conditioned to believe that feeling every single pebble, every blade of grass, is the key to detecting more bites and therefore catching more fish. We spend a fortune on these advanced materials and technologies that transmit the slightest vibration from the lure straight to our fingertips. The common wisdom is simple. The stiffer the rod, the faster the action, the more direct the connection for a powerful, lightning-fast hook set. On paper, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? A quick, brutal transfer of energy. But in our obsession with what we feel, we've completely forgotten to consider what the fish feels. And that's where this entire philosophy begins to crumble, costing us countless fish right at the moment of truth. So let's start with the basic physics of the problem. It all comes down to force and shock absorption. A hook set is a violent event. You are trying to apply a very specific amount of force very quickly to drive a small piece of metal through the tissue in a fish's mouth. An ultra-stiff, extra-fast action rod is designed for one thing: maximum power transfer with zero delay. It acts like a solid lever. When you snap your wrist or pull back, nearly 100% of that initial explosive energy is transferred directly down the line to the hook point. There is virtually no give, no cushion, no moment of delay for the forces to balance out. It's an all-or-nothing, instantaneous shock to the system. This is often marketed as a positive, a feature for driving a big single hook home. But that's only half the story, and it's the more dangerous half. Think of it like this, a real-world example. Imagine you're trying to hammer a very small nail into a relatively soft piece of pine wood. You have two hammers in your toolbox. One is a heavy, solid steel framing hammer. The other is a rubber mallet. If you swing that steel hammer with all your might, what happens? You'll likely bend the nail, or you might split the wood entirely, because the force is too great and too sudden. There's no forgiveness. But if you use the rubber mallet, it has a little bit of give. The force is applied more gradually, allowing the nail to penetrate the wood without destroying it. The rubber mallet absorbs some of that initial violent shock. This is a perfect analogy for your fishing rod during a hook set. Your choice of rod determines whether you're swinging a steel hammer or a rubber mallet at the fish's mouth. Your high-modulus, extra-fast action graphite rod is that steel hammer. It's brutal and unforgiving. When you get a bite and react, that rod transfers an incredible amount of sharp, tearing force. On the other hand, a rod with a more moderate action, perhaps made of fiberglass, a composite blend, or even a more forgiving graphite, acts like that rubber mallet. It has a deeper bend. When you set the hook, the rod blank itself flexes and absorbs that initial violent shock. This doesn't mean it's a weak hook set. It just means the force is applied over a few extra milliseconds. It's a powerful, driving push rather than a sharp, tearing rip. This slight delay and cushioning effect is the single most important and most overlooked factor in keeping a hook pinned in a fish's mouth, especially during those first critical seconds of the fight. This lack of shock absorption is the first critical flaw of an overly stiff rod. It creates a scenario with zero margin for error. If the fish has the hook at a weird angle, you rip it out. If your hook set is a little too aggressive, you rip it out. If the fish has a soft mouth, you rip it out. The system is just too rigid. Now amplify this problem by adding a no-stretch line into the mix, like braided line, which most of us use these days for its sensitivity. Now you have a rigid rod connected to a rigid line. You have created a system with absolutely zero forgiveness. The only thing left in that system that has any give is the soft, fleshy tissue inside the fish's mouth. And that is a recipe for disaster. You're asking a thin membrane of skin to handle the full, explosive force of your hook set, and it's a battle that tissue will lose most of the time. Now let's flip the script and think about it from the fish's point of view. A fish doesn't have hands. It investigates and eats with its mouth. When a bass or a walleye decides to eat your lure, it's often a fast, reactive strike. It flares its gills, opens its mouth, and sucks in a volume of water that brings your lure with it. The lure is inside its mouth for a brief moment as the fish crushes down or turns to swim away. At this point, the hook points are just resting against the tissue. They haven't penetrated yet. This is the moment you feel that tick on your sensitive rod. You feel the lure get inhaled, or you feel the fish clamp down. Your brain screams, "Set the hook," and you react. But what happens next in that split second determines whether you land that fish or just reel in a slack line. The inside of a fish's mouth isn't a solid piece of steel. It's a complex structure of bone, cartilage, and very thin, soft membranes of tissue. Think about the paper-thin skin in the corner of a crappie's mouth, or the soft flesh on the roof of a bass's mouth, and that tissue is surprisingly delicate. For a hook to do its job, the point needs to penetrate that tissue and embed itself, preferably into something more solid like cartilage or bone. This requires a sharp point and a steady, powerful push. The key word there is push. You want the hook to drive in and stay in. You don't want to create a massive hole or a tear that the hook can then easily pull out of. You are not trying to punch a hole through a piece of paper. You are trying to secure an anchor. When you use an ultra-stiff rod, especially paired with a no-stretch line like braid, the force you apply is astronomical and instantaneous. The moment you pull, the hook point doesn't get a chance to dig in and find purchase. Instead, it acts like a blade. The immense, sudden pressure on that tiny point either tears a huge gash in the fish's mouth, or it rips a hole so large that the hook simply doesn't hold. The fish thrashes its head once or twice, and the hook just falls out of the oversized hole you created. You might feel the fish's weight for a second, but it's not truly hooked. You've essentially just snagged it for a moment before the tissue gives way. This is the #1 reason for losing fish on the hook set or in the first few seconds of the fight. You're not setting a hook. You're performing a violent, instantaneous surgery, and the patient is escaping. I've seen it countless times on underwater footage. A fish eats the bait, the line tightens, and with a stiff rod, you can literally see the hook tear sideways through the fish's jaw tissue and come flying out. The angler feels the bite, feels the weight, and then it's gone. They'll blame it on the fish spitting the hook. But the fish didn't spit anything. The hook was never properly set. It was ripped out by an overly aggressive tool that was designed for sensitivity, not for the delicate and dynamic process of actually hooking and landing a fish. We've been sold on the idea of a bone-jarring hook set, but more often than not, it should be a bone-pinning hook set. Let's talk about specific situations where this problem gets even worse. Think about the lures you use. The issue isn't as pronounced with a giant single 5/0 flipping hook. that you're driving into the hard cartilage of a bass's jaw in heavy cover. For that specific application, a stiff rod is often necessary. But what about the other 90% of your fishing? What about when you're using lures with small, light wire hooks, or even worse, treble hooks? This is where the stiff rod becomes a massive liability, actively working against you and costing you fish after fish. It's about matching the tool to the specific application, and most applications do not require a broomstick with guides on it. Most fishing situations call for a bit of finesse and forgiveness that a super stiff rod simply cannot provide. Consider fishing with treble hooks, like on a crankbait or a topwater lure. Those small, thin hooks are not designed to be driven home with the force of a battering ram. Their job is to snag and hold. When a fish swipes at a crankbait, it often gets hooked by just 1 or 2 points of a treble, often in the thin skin on the outside of its mouth. If you set the hook with a stiff rod, you're almost guaranteed to rip those tiny hooks right out. You'll tear a hole in the fish's face and the lure will come flying back at you. This is why you see so many pro anglers using softer, moderate action fiberglass or composite rods for their crankbaits. It's not because they don't want to feel the bite. It's because they want to land the fish that bite. The rod's flex keeps those small hooks pinned during the fight. The same principle applies to fish with notoriously soft mouths like crappie or trout. Anglers who specialize in these species have known this for decades. They use light, flexible rods. Why? Because if you try to set the hook on a big crappie with a stiff base rod, you'll do what they call ripping its lips off. The hook will tear a giant hole in the paper-thin membrane of its mouth, and the fish will be gone. The softer rod acts as a crucial shock absorber, allowing the hook to set without tearing the delicate tissue. It then keeps steady, gentle pressure on the fish throughout the fight. This isn't some new age theory, it's a time-tested principle that somehow got lost in the modern marketing hype for ultra-stiff, ultra-sensitive base rods, which many anglers now try to use for everything. Even with a single hook on a jig or a soft plastic, the problem persists, especially in open water. Let's say a walleye or a bass picks up your jig from the bottom. You feel the thump on your sensitive rod and you swing for the fences. But that fish might have the hook at a strange angle, barely inside its mouth. Your violent hook set doesn't drive the point home. Instead, it yanks the entire lure, pulling the hook point sideways and ripping it out before it ever gets a chance to penetrate. You've created so much force so quickly that you've literally pulled the bait away from the fish. A slightly softer rod would have allowed the fish to turn with the bait for a split second longer, letting that hook point find its home and seat properly before the full power of your hook set is applied. So, what's the solution? Does this mean you should throw away all your expensive sensitive rods? Absolutely not. The solution lies in understanding the crucial difference between rod power and rod action, and then choosing the right tool for the job. These two terms are often used interchangeably by anglers, but they mean two very different things. Getting this right is the key to unlocking your equipment's true potential. Power is about strength, but action is about finesse. And in the game of not ripping hooks out of a fish's mouth, finesse is far more important than brute strength. It's time we stop thinking about our rods as just tools for feeling bites and start seeing them as systems for landing fish. First, let's define rod power. Power, which is typically rated as ultralight, light, medium, medium-heavy, or heavy, is about the rod's lifting strength. It's a measure of how much pressure it takes to bend the rod. A heavy power rod is like a crane. It's designed for horsing big fish out of thick cover with heavy line. An ultralight rod is designed for casting tiny lures and protecting very light line from breaking. Power is about backbone. It's important, but it's not the main culprit in our hook ripping problem. You can have a heavy power rod that is actually very forgiving and a medium power rod that is brutally stiff. It all comes down to the rod's action. Rod action, however, is where the magic happens. This describes where along the rod, the rod begins to bend. This is the most critical factor we're discussing today. An extra fast action rod bends only in the top 10 to 15% of the blank, near the tip. A fast action rod bends in the top quarter. A moderate action rod bends all the way down into the middle of the blank, creating a much deeper, more parabolic curve. That extra fast rod is our steel hammer. It transfers energy instantly. The moderate action rod is our rubber mallet. It has that built-in shock absorption we've been talking about. Understanding this single concept can change the way you buy and use your fishing rods forever. A rod with a moderate or moderate fast action acts as a beautiful shock absorber during the hook set and the fight. When a fish bites and you swing, the rod bends deeply. This cushions the hook set, preventing you from ripping the hooks out. It allows the fish to fully take the bait. Then, during the fight, especially when the fish makes a sudden run or thrashes its head near the boat, the rod's deep flex keeps constant, even pressure on the line. It's like a spring, maintaining tension so the hook stays pinned. An extra fast rod, on the other hand, can't do this. When a fish thrashes, the stiff rod doesn't give, causing the line to momentarily go slack. That tiny bit of slack is all a fish needs to throw the hook. The softer rod is simply a more efficient tool for keeping fish hooked. So, when is a stiff, sensitive, extra-fast action rod actually the right tool for the job? There are absolutely times when it's the perfect choice. Think about techniques where you need to drive a large, single hook through solid plastic and into the hard part of a fish's jaw at long range or in very heavy cover. Techniques like flipping heavy jigs, punching thick mats, or fishing a Carolina rig. In these situations, you need that instant power transfer to move a lot of line quickly and get a deep, solid hook penetration. The sensitivity also helps you detect subtle bites in thick vegetation or deep water. For these specific power fishing applications, a stiff rod excels. It's a specialized tool for a specialized job. But for moving baits, the equation changes completely. For any lure with treble hooks, crankbaits, jerkbaits, topwater plugs, you should almost always be using a more moderate action rod. You need that forgiveness to avoid ripping out those small hooks. The same goes for reaction baits like chatterbaits and spinnerbaits. Fish often slash at these baits, and a softer rod will help you hook and land a much higher percentage of those slashing strikes. When you feel the bite on a moving bait, you don't need to snap the rod. A simple, sweeping hook set, what we call a reel set, is all you need. You just start reeling faster and pull back smoothly, letting the rod's parabolic bend do the work of setting the hook for you. It's also about adjusting your own technique. The hook set itself is a skill, and many of us have been taught to be far too aggressive. We see the pros on television doing these massive boat-moving hook sets, and we try to imitate them, but they are often using very specific gear for very specific situations in heavy cover. For the average angler fishing in open water, that kind of hook set is total overkill, and as we've discussed, it's often counterproductive. Try to transition from a violent snap to a firm pull. When you feel a bite, pull back steadily and firmly, reeling at the same time. Let the rod load up and drive the hook home smoothly. This single change in your muscle memory will result in more landed fish, regardless of what rod you're using. Ultimately, this isn't about throwing out your expensive rods or saying that sensitivity is bad. Sensitivity is a great thing to have. This is about understanding that fishing is a game of balancing forces. It's about recognizing that your rod is more than just a bite detector. It's a shock absorber and a fish-fighting tool. The new mindset should be to choose the softest, most forgiving rod action you can get away with for a given technique. Start with moderation and only move to a stiffer, faster rod when the technique absolutely demands it. Prioritize landing the fish over feeling every single pebble on the bottom, because at the end of the day, feeling a bite means nothing if you can't get that fish into the boat. So, the big takeaway is this: our relentless chase for ultimate sensitivity has led many of us to use rods that are simply too stiff for the job. They act like a crowbar, not a shock absorber. Instead of allowing a hook to sink in and hold, they create a massive, sudden hole and then rip the hook right back out before the fish is truly pinned. The real aha moment here is realizing that a good fishing rod is a complete system. It's not just about feeling the bite, it's about absorbing the incredible shock of the hookset and the fight, keeping that hook buried. That little bit of flex, that slightly slower, more moderate action, is not your enemy. In most situations, it is your greatest ally in landing more fish. So this changes everything. It means you might need to rethink your go-to rod for certain techniques. That crankbait rod might need to be a moderate action glass or composite. That topwater rod might benefit from a softer tip. It's about matching the tool to the specific job, not just buying the most expensive, sensitive stick on the rack. Thank you for sticking with me through this deep dive. I hope it's given you a new perspective. If this video helped you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that challenges the old ways of thinking. And for my final question, after hearing all this, are you going to look at your rod collection differently? Let me know which rod you're now questioning in the comments below. Let's talk about it.